And staying with that story, while smaller political parties are furious and are questioning the relevance of the National Dialogue on Coalitions, which was held, of course, yesterday and today at the University of the Western Cape. Well, this comes after Deputy Minister of Cooperative Governance, Mr. Parks Dow, had actually told the gathering that the legislation on the coalitions had already been drafted. Now, several parties said that the gathering was just an expensive talk shop designed to keep the ANC in power in the upcoming elections, while the ATM yesterday reportedly staged a walkout during proceedings. Mr. Sandile Swana, a political analyst, joins us now via Zoom to unpack and give us more insight on this. Mr. Swana, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Look, your views on the reports that the ANC already had a legislation on coalitions before even other parties who basically form an essential part of talks and negotiations were actually engaged.
To the extent that that is true, Alicia and your viewers, it would be most unfortunate. There are reasons why I would say that it would be most unfortunate, some of them being the ones that the PAC has raised, and Zungula has been quite detailed in his argument. But you will notice that Professor William Gumede in 2016 already did studies on coalitions in Africa and found that coalitions in Africa, there are countries, the most successful African countries such as Mauritius, Seychelles and so on, are actually led by a coalition. Mm-hmm. The latest study, which is in some way a basis for this, Nkululeko Tselane says that coalitions are becoming the norm in Africa, and dominant parties such as the ANC are no longer getting more than 50% of the vote. So coalitions and governments of national unity are actually becoming the norm now.
Look, Sandile, there's still obviously, I think, quite a lot of misunderstanding, or let me say non-clarity on matters regarding how actually successful coalitions like you've just mentioned in the African countries can actually be actualized in this country. What, in your view, constitutes an ethical coalition agreement between parties?
The first thing that we've got to do in South Africa, coalition or no coalition, but in this case we're talking about coalitions, is that every single political party must start off by agreeing to run the country according to the constitution of the country. Our country has got stated duties that the government must actually deliver on. For instance, when children at the university students are demanding free education, it's actually stated in the constitution. And so on and so on. Housing is stated in the Constitution. So a lot of the things that make parties to conflict is that each one of them does not want to implement the Constitution as the Constitution states. So that's the first thing. So people need to confine themselves. Second level of confining yourself is to confine yourself to the NDP, National Development Plan. Confine yourself to the AU Vision 2063. As well as the findings of the Auditor General, all those things that have got 11-year backlog, some of them. So people don't need to go anywhere to look for work to do. Then we can go into who is going to take which portfolio. In other words, what I'm saying is that let's agree on the substance of the work that needs to be done within existing laws, regardless of who's going to do that. Can we first agree what the cabinet is going to do? And lastly, can we then say that seats are going to be only allocated according to how many votes you've got? In other words, proportional representation in the cabinet. Our history shows clearly that we've not benefited from the dominant party model in the Western Cape with the DA, in all the other provinces and nationally. It has not served us well. So it must be a government of provincial unity, it must be a government of local unity, and it must be a government of national unity.
You know, Sandile, yesterday I was talking to another analyst, and I of course, made them aware of the fact that the ANC's national spokesperson there had released a statement saying that whoever actually has the majority vote should be the one that is leading the coalitions. But do you think then, with our current political climate and structures, we could ever achieve successful coalitions, looking specifically at how different all our multi-political parties all have a very extremely different policies and mandates? Is there any way or even hope that they could put their differences aside and actually work together to achieve successful coalitions?
Professor Letana of the University of Johannesburg has actually completed studies that show clearly that in South Africa, within certain municipalities, coalitions have been very successful. The coalitions that have been unsuccessful, for instance, in Johannesburg, the people who made those coalitions unsuccessful, in my book, the DA would be number one, the ANC number two. So the very people who are running up and down, saying coalitions didn't work and so on, were actually at the core of making coalitions not work. Even in the report that about coalitions right now, it's not written the reasons why the coalitions didn't. There's no explanation in the document published by the president. There's no the reasons are not stated. Now, lastly, South Africa, the scholars in South Africa have been advocating, and the government has been trying to move in that direction, that the programs of government need to be based on evidence-based planning, evidence-based policy making. So your ideology is irrelevant to how you run a successful government. The Chinese have proven that ideology is not the most crucial thing. You must be pragmatic, and you must be based, your policy must be based on evidence. In other words, empirical evidence.
Look, Sandile, we've seen in recent weeks leaders of parties like the PA heading to Israel to conduct their coalition study. Is it about time our political structures then cast a wider net and look abroad on how other countries have been able to form and sustain successful coalitions, which we earlier talked about, or and of course the respective nations? Or maybe they need to look deeply at our country's problems when creating or establishing a coalition's blueprint or policy?
Mandela started this country on a coalition, which is a government of national unity. A lot of the other provinces, if I'm not mistaken, three, which would have been Western Cape, KZN, and Northern Cape, started on coalition on governments of provincial unity and so on. Successfully so. And those provinces, by and large, have been the least negatively affected. The provinces that deteriorated the fastest were the ones where the ANC got complete total domination, and those deteriorated the fastest as such. So, yes, you can go to another country, but have you studied the actual examples that have happened here in South Africa at the provincial level? Have you studied what has happened at the successful coalition municipalities over the years? Have you read the reports and research reports prepared by our own scholars and academics here in South Africa and on the continent before visiting Germany or visiting Israel?
All right, Sandile, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much. That is political analyst Mr. Sandile Swana giving us some insight into how coalitions in South Africa could work. And of course, that was on the back of the coalition's government dialogue that took place out in Cape Town.